Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Cokerhook. This evening, we're going to be talking about a subject that is current issues, things that are very relevant and appropriate today that's in the news a lot, and that has to do with the topic of immigration. And joining me today is Kelly McCown. Kelly is an attorney in the immigration field, and we're going to be talking about a lot of things that I think you folks are going to be interested in. So Kelly, welcome to Reference Point.
Thanks so much.
Glad you're able to make it down here today.
I'm happy to be here.
Appreciate the fact that you came down for this, and I think this is a subject that has a lot of it's almost a lightning rod sort of thing these days. There's been very interesting discusussion on it's almost like a polarizing effect with some things tied to the immigration situation, and I don't remember seeing this intense for a long, long time.
It's true.
It's true.
It's been, I guess we went through this last time in 2006 and didn't get anywhere with immigration reform. But I think, people support the idea of solving this problem.
So how would we define the problem?
Well, there are probably estimated 11 million people who are unauthorized in the U.S. who are here, doing a lot of jobs that Americans don't want to do, frankly.
Right.
And pretty hard work in many cases, but working hard and trying to, make a life for their families here. Many of them are kind of mixed immigration families where they have, one person in the family is a legal citizen, one is not. They have U.S. citizen kids.
When you say that legal citizen, is that because either it was an American that married somebody from Europe or South America or whatever, or just that once of the couple had gone through the process of green card and then citizenship and the other one had not, or?
It could be a variety of things. To get a green card in the United States, even through a marriage to a citizen, you need to have a legal entry. So if someone entered across one of the borders without getting inspected by an immigration officer, even if that person later meets and marries, let's say, a U.S. citizen, the citizen spouse can't sponsor him or her for a green card because of that illegal entry.
They never met the standards,
right,
so to speak. Okay. So and there's a lot of people who fit into that category. It's like, I don't remember what the numbers were. I got some information. You were kind enough to refer me to what was that? I have it written down here. The American Immigration Council website, which has some very interesting data and everything. I think one of the issues I want to ask you about here is why is it that people have this concern? What's the big concern that Americans have about the making changes to the immigration laws?
I think there are a lot of concerns with this current immigration proposal, if you want to talk about that, the Senate bill that passed, bipartisan bill.
Right.
I think there are concerns that the path to citizenship for people should be tied to securing the borders completely. And I think there's a myth or maybe a misperception that the Obama administration's been light on enforcement. I don't think that's the case. Right now, these unauthorized border crossings are down to a 40-year low.
Oh, really?
So really, we're spending more on immigration enforcement than we're spending for all federal agencies combined that have law enforcement activities. So it's really a high level of spending currently, and I think tying that to a path to citizenship is misplaced, because for the law to be successful, for reform to be successful, people need to be able to really fully integrate into society.
Sure.
And becoming citizens eventually is a big part of that. And people who become citizens can vote, yes, but they also are much more integrated into society. They have to pass English tests and civics tests to become citizens.
Right.
And they're really become invested in that. And so I think that's an important part of any immigration reform proposal that we have.
I'm taking away from what you just said that it might be more appropriate to separate the two concepts. Border security, which from a standpoint of national security relative to what happened in 9/11 and those sorts of things. That's different than citizenship structure and actual immigration. I mean, those are not they're not the same thing. They're actually somewhat different issues, it seems to me.
I think that's right. And I think the path to citizenship, you know, one of the things that people get concerned about there is that people are jumping in line, that they're actually moving ahead of people who've been waiting for a long time to become green card holders, which is the first step before you become a citizen, is you get the green card first, you become a permanent resident. So there are people in line for that who have been waiting 10, 20 years in some cases because of our current backlogs.
Wow.
And so the Senate proposal would guarantee that all of those people get their green cards and get permanent residence before any of these new immigrants who would be given a path to citizenship through the immigration reform bill. So it really would, they wouldn't go ahead of any of the others, but it would reform a part of our immigration system that I think is very problematic. It causes very long waits for people, not just to get a green card through employment, but to reunite with family members too.
Right.
People are waiting very, very long time for that. And so by taking care of that backlog, what that means is that it would be at least 10 years before any of these new immigrants created through the immigration reform bill would even be eligible to get a green card.
So we're talking
about a way in the future.
We're talking about people who are already here by virtue of having come through the visa process or whatever and are here authorized, and yet can't get through the bureaucratic red tape to get the green card and the citizenship and that sort of thing.
Correct.
Is that what
and there's a very long wait depending on the country you're from.
How many people are in that type of a situation?
Well, you know, I'm not really sure of the number, but what I do know is that the weight per country is extreme, and there are extreme differences. If you are born in India or China and you're applying through employment, for example, which is a big part of my practice, is handling those kinds of cases, depending on the category that you're in, the estimate is it could take 50 years to get a green card if you're born in India and from the kind of, I call it less skilled, but it really isn't. It's for jobs that require, let's say, a bachelor's degree in 4 years or less of experience.
Wow. So are you saying it's that much time before they'll be provided with the visa? Or if they may be able to get, what is it, H-1B? I kept saying that wrong. I kept switching over H-1B. Are we talking about that type of a thing for a lot of these folks? India specifically, because we get a lot of high-tech people that come to the U.S. from India. So they come in through the H-1B, and then they'll get the job, and as long as they are employed, they are able to continue to renew that. My son has a similar situation. He lives in London, and so he's an American citizen working in London, and he has to go through this process over there every couple of years, I think it is, so that they can, if his company says, yeah, we're going to continue to have this person on our payroll, then then it gets renewed. And I guess it's fairly similar to what goes on here?
Yes, it's very similar. So people are here working on a legal work visa, usually an H-1B in that situation. They can apply for the first 2 steps of the 3-step green card process through employment, but after the second step they have to wait. So then they wait until their number comes up in the queue, and the queue is regulated by the State Department. And every month the State Department publishes a visa bulletin that lists for each category which visa numbers are current. And so for some of these people, it's a real waiting game. Maybe they've been waiting, for, let's say, India, the higher skilled category, where people have a master's degree or a bachelor's and 5 years of experience, and the job also requires those types of requirements. It's still, the date that is current for India is still back in 2008 right now. So it's still just doing those numbers.
So
it
those
could be
were
a 4
people
or 5
that
year
qualified
wait.
back in 2008 that are still waiting to be able to get the 3rd step?
Right, exactly
what are
right.
the 3 steps? I hadn't.
The first step is called PERM. It's a labor certification. So that's where the employer tests the labor market and has to prove that there isn't a qualified U.S. worker for that particular position.
Okay.
And then once that's been approved by the Labor Department, then the employer files the immigrant petition, which is called the I-140 petition.
Okay.
And then that goes through and it is essentially filed with the Immigration Service, but is just reiterating what was in the PERM application. And then that's the second step. The third step is adjustment of status, and that's the foreign national's green card application.
Okay. Okay.
So it's that final step that you have to wait to file when your visa number is current. So that's the waiting time that people are facing.
At what point in that three-step process does the H-1B candidate get a visa that says, yeah, you can come here and start working?
It's actually independent of the green card process.
It's independent?
Yes.
Oh.
So the H-1B is a work visa. So all the like alphabet soup of visas, the ones that start with letters, those are all temporary visas of different kinds.
Okay.
Some are for students to go to school, the F1 visa. Some are for people to visit, that's the B1 business visitor visa, and the B2 tourist visa. And the H-1B is a work visa, and that's the most common visa for people basically in high-skilled jobs who are working in the US.
Okay.
And so the first step to coming to the United States for many people is being sponsored for the H-1B by their employer.
Okay.
And then coming to the United States, and that's valid for 3 years. And then sometime possibly during that first 3 years, or maybe the second 3-year renewal, the employer agrees to sponsor the person for a green card.
Got it. So how long does it take for someone to get approved for on the visa?
Well, it's generally not a long process. The problem with the H-1B, or the barrier that we often find, is that there's an annual quota that becomes an issue.
A quota for the number of people who can apply or can be granted, not apply, anybody can apply, right? But it's whether or not you're granted.
Well, it's actually a little bit of both, because the quota governs whether an application can even be filed with the government, whether a petition can even be filed.
Wow.
So the government quota opens every year October 1st, which is the beginning of the fiscal year for the federal government. So every year, April 1st, 6 months ahead, employers can file those petitions.
For the following October.
For the following October.
Okay.
So if I had an employer come to me today and say, I've identified this great candidate, he's working in the UK right now, I'd like to sponsor him for an H-1B visa, I have to tell them that the soonest he can come and work for you is October 1st, 2014.
Wow.
And we can't really even start the application until early next year and
that's
file
supposed
it
to
April
happen
1st.
in April. Oh, you can start the paperwork, but you can't file it until April 1st. Wow. Is that true? You mentioned that there are different types of work visas. Is this process you just described true for all work visa structures?
No, it's not. The H-1B is really unique in having that annual quota. Other work visas don't have that type of restriction. And if they do have a quota, there are a few that do. It's so underutilized that it never really gets up to the limit. And those are generally some of the free trade visas that exist.
So why have a quota on the H-1B? What was the purpose of establishing a quota?
Well, it's been in place for a really long time. Before I started practicing immigration law, I'm sure. But I think the idea of it is to, allow for highly skilled workers to come and work here to meet the needs of U.S. businesses, but also make sure that it's regulated and that the H-1B workers are not taking jobs away from Americans and that they're paid a market salary. So it's a very regulated visa. There's a lot of protections for U.S. workers in there, and also, hoops that employers jump through to be able to sponsor someone.
The employer needs to prove that they can't find a qualified candidate stateside.
They don't need to do that actually for the H-1B visa.
Well, they don't.
While it's necessary in the green card context in most situations, in the work visa context, it's not required typically. And the employer just needs to promise to pay the prevailing wage, which is kind of like the market wage for that position.
Right.
And there can't be a strike or lockout at the workplace. The worker can't undercut benefits to other people or wages to other people that are employed in the U.S. So there are all sorts of requirements that the employer has to guarantee that it's going to meet.
Interesting. Now here in California, we've got two large industry groups, I would say, that where workers from out of the country seem to have a major impact. One is the high-tech area, because we do a lot in hardware and software development and the mobile thises and that's that are going on these days. And a lot of people are coming here, not just from the United States, but from Europe, etc. to get positions. But the other is agriculture, because we're a huge agricultural state.
Mm-hmm.
Are things that's a different process or a different program for agricultural workers, right?
Yes, absolutely. We don't have a very well utilized agricultural visa program in this country. There is a visa available, but I don't think it's really used to its potential. And part of the reason, I think, is just the cost of going through the process and the red tape make it really impractical for a lot of agricultural employers.
How so?
Well, I think it's really, part of it is the regulatory requirements. Part of it is the fact that their visas are only valid for short periods of time, where the need goes on for a longer period. So in the Senate bill, one of the proposals is to create an agricultural temporary worker program where workers could come and get 3-year visas. They would have the right to travel, so they could still live at home with their families if they wanted to, and travel back and forth if they're living outside the U.S. or the families outside the U.S. But it would give them a lot of flexibility, and I think it would create about 300,000 visas per year. So it would be really helpful for the employers that right now are really struggling to get their crops picked.
Right. That's one of the things that is part of the what's the word I'm looking for? What people think or talk about. They say, "Oh, we got all of these farm workers who are not here legally, etc." But I think the part of the challenge is that I know very, very few people who are interested in going out and picking strawberries all day, or harvesting rice, or it's just like cotton. It just doesn't happen. You don't see that. And the American education system is pushing all young people in the direction of go to college, get your 4-year degree, or get a master's, or get a PhD, because that's what you should do, whether you're better off with a trade or not. I mean, that's a whole other conversation we won't go into, but we do have a lot of those kinds of service-related and physical activity-related functions that need to be performed that the average Joe and Jane American doesn't seem to be interested in.
I think you're absolutely right about that, David. It's I read a story about a few years back, the UFW union, United Farm Workers Union, launched a campaign called Take Our Jobs. I don't know if you heard about it. They basically just advertised, come and do these jobs, come be a farm worker, pick strawberries, pick lettuce. And they received about 4 million inquiries after they advertised this effort.
Right.
And people were asking questions like, will I get paid vacation, and are the fields air conditioned? And
or the fields air conditioned. That's a good one.
Which is kind of crazy. And then
only if the wind blows.
And once the jobs were actually explained to the people who had called, only 11,000 people or so followed up to actually go a step further. And then at the end of this whole process, there were only 11 people who showed up to actually do the work.
Wow.
And so it was, I think the point of that was just that these are jobs that are very, very difficult. People are paid by the piece when they pick strawberries.
Right.
And the people who make, I think the average salary is something like $10 an hour, but that's an average. Some people, make less and some make more, and to make more or to make close to $10 an hour, it's backbreaking because they have to pick as quickly as they can, because it's per piece, and they don't want to take a break to go get water or use the restroom.
The challenge is that that's necessary. Given the way a lot of the agricultural activities are, somebody has to pull the apples off the tree, somebody's got to harvest the lettuce, because in wheat and corn areas, you can get the combines and go through and just pull that stuff off. But there's a lot of vegetation that you can't do that with. And somebody has to do that, or the fruit's just going to rot. And we Americans love our peaches and apples and oranges and all that sort of stuff, so somebody's got to pick those things. So would it not seem logical that we would have, as a country, we know that if we, I'm not sure how I want to say this, but just the thought that's going through my head is there are a lot of people in south of our border, in Mexico and Central America, South America, who would jump at the opportunity to come here and make that kind of money here, which is huge for them back there. Not necessarily want to not go home, but people who are in that kind, I'm speculating, people who are in that kind of service industry, you know, up here there's certain times of year where you can harvest, and then, but when it gets winter up here, they're going to be moving down to Central South America where it's summertime, you know, and they can harvest down there, etc. So, am I making sense? Is this?
No, absolutely. I think we need a more sensible approach to this, and it's clear that.
So what's preventing that from happening?
Well, part of the problem I think now is that there really isn't a visa that works for employers. At least that's what I hear. That there really isn't a temporary ag visa, agricultural visa that they can use reliably to get the workers here, and I hear of these shortages of people to pick the crops and the lettuce rotting in the field and that kind of thing. So there needs to be, in combination with immigration reform, there needs to be some other type of system to make those, create those opportunities for the farmers to get people to pick the crops and work the fields. It's a hard job. And one of the things that would happen, I think, is with immigration reform, those wages would go up. Because I think there would be more control over the conditions of those workers.
Sure.
And they'd have more power as a result, because they wouldn't be undocumented and voiceless.
Right.
So I think there would be a lot of positive changes that would come out of that for agriculture.
Is the visa process separate from the immigration process? I mean, we talked earlier about the fact that enforcement and immigration are not really the same thing. But is the visa process and the immigration process, are they two separate things as well, or they seem to be more closely related? But
well, the visa application process is part of immigration. The green card process is too. They're just kind of different angles or different sides to people getting status. So they can get temporary status in the form of a visa, or a more permanent status or permanent residence, which is a green card and the right to live here for the rest of your life if you want to.
Right.
And then after you have the green card for 5 years, you can apply to become a U.S. citizen. So they're kind of steps along the process.
Okay. So you have to be here 5 years on a green card.
Yes, exactly.
Before you can apply to be a U.S. citizen. Interesting. So, where does that leave us? We're going to actually, I'll let the audience know, we hadn't mentioned this initially, but we're actually going to do 2 segments of the show. Our show is usually 30 minutes long. And we're kind of laying some foundational work here, but I want to talk a little bit more about the issues of reform and some of the initiatives and some of the reasons why, etc. We'll get into that in the next segments. But when we talk about the current structure of the system, has it generally been working? I mean, is it a workable structure for the most part, or is it broken?
That's a difficult question to answer, because our immigration system for, let's say, family-based, employment-based categories, which are the bulk of the categories for people to get permanent status, those numbers for annual limitations haven't changed since 1990. So it's been a long time since they've been adjusted upward, and I think the demand is such that many of those categories have extremely long wait times.
Are those numbers tied to countries, or is it a general number? Anybody can, once we get to X amount, whether the people are coming from India or Croatia or Mozambique, whatever, or does each country have a quota, so to speak?
There are actually per country limitations, so that there's a limit on how many overall green cards can be given to people from, not just from a country, but who are born in certain countries or in a given country. And so the result of that is that in the family immigration categories, there are long waits for countries where more family-based immigration is coming from.
Trying to bring your spouse or your mother and father or something like that.
And in the employment-based categories, likewise, India and China seem to have the longest backlogs, but they're there have been backlogs for other countries historically as well. So it really, it isn't kind of first come, first served in the sense that if you're born in one country versus another, because of demand, because there are more people like you applying to get green cards from your country, it'll take you a lot longer. You're not on the same footing as someone from a country with relatively low immigration.
Got it.
And so I think the Senate bill, one of the proposals is to take away the per country limitations and create a system that's a little bit more even-handed, where it wouldn't be exactly first come, first serve probably, but it would be more in line with if you applied around the same time as someone from another country with lower demand, you might get your green cards at the same time.
Got it.
And it may be the case that some people have a little bit of a wait that didn't have a wait before.
Right.
But I think the proposal would be to do away
Overall,
with all of those backlogs.
It'd be a little bit more balanced approach rather than...
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I can see how it can be a challenge for someone who has come here and they went through the process, they got their work visa, they've been here for a while, et cetera, and then trying to bring a family member here. It just seems like we have our issues with that. But I want to talk about that a little bit more when we get to the next segment, because we only have about a minute left in our show time here, so for this segment. So before we end off, is there anything else relative to this foundational discussion we've had that we should touch on?
I guess the one thing we haven't really talked about is where is immigration reform going right now?
Right.
And Congress is in recess at the moment.
Yes.
So nothing is really happening right now, but I'm hopeful that when they reconvene in September that we'll see some movement in the House, because the bill that passed was bipartisan.
Right.
And
the House seems to be throwing little darts at each other. What I'm hopeful of is that the folks who are listening to our conversation are learning something that maybe would motivate them to let their representative know how they feel about this topic, and maybe we're shedding some light on things so that we get away from the speculations and the news issues, the right or the left, that are pounding the drum for their perspective, and try to put a little bit more rational thought into this, and maybe that'll help the folks out there. So, Kelly, I appreciate you being here today. Hang on, because we're going to do another segment here. And ladies and gentlemen, appreciate you coming to watch us at Reference Point. And don't forget, if you have any questions for us here, for myself about other things, or Kelly about the topic we're discussing right now, send those queries to info@referencepointtv.com. We'll get them to the right party, and then we can get those questions answered. So again, thank you, Kelly. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time on Reference Point.